You're now recording.
Great. I don't know how well it's picking me up on the mic, so Grace, if you can or cannot hear me, please drop it in the chat. In the meantime, I'm gonna just keep going. So, as a graduate student, you are going to be on the hook to be applying for your own funding. In order to apply for your own funding, you need to go through previously established avenues such as the NSF or NASA. In this talk, I'll be going through both. Both have different requirements and different eligibilities. I have personally won both while at Mason as a student, so you can also win them at Mason as a student. And we'll leave plenty of time to go through specific examples if there's any questions, et cetera, et cetera. So, to begin, we're going to start with the NSF GRFP. So the NSF GRFP is the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program. It is a 5-year fellowship and it comes with 3 years of funding. So for the full 5 years, you are able to say that you are an NSF GRF fellow, even if you only have funding for 3 of those years. And you can select which of the 3 years you want to receive the money for within that 5-year time frame. But you have all 5 years to use the 3 years of money that you get. The funding includes your tuition, your healthcare, it includes your stipend, and it is a higher stipend than most graduate students normally get. I believe right now the base pay is $37,000, where normally research assistants make, if they're lucky, 30. So it's already an increase of $7K, and many schools will also offer additional stipends on top of the $37,000 as an incentive for you to come to their program. So there's lots of incentives to try to go for the NSF GRFP. You have 2 chances to apply. One chance is during undergraduate, and you can technically apply at any point during your undergraduate career. However, if you win, you need to use your first bout of money the following year. So applying as, say, a sophomore doesn't make a lot of sense because you would, even if you won, not be able to use the money and therefore have to forfeit the fellowship that you just won. So generally people apply during their senior year of undergraduate. And then you have 1 chance to apply when you are in graduate school. So you can apply as a 1st or 2nd year graduate student. After your 2nd year, you are no longer eligible. There are some also caveats to this. So if you did your undergrad and then you took a break, or you did a post-baccalaureate position, for instance, you can apply during that post-baccalaureate position and it would apply in the same way that your undergrad application would. If you applied as an undergrad, you're still eligible to apply as a postbac. So you can almost get a freebie in there if you were to take a break or to go do something else before you went to grad school. But the eventual goal is always to take this to graduate study. Yeah.
You said that we can apply as 1st or 2nd year grad students. If I don't get it my 1st year, can I apply my 2nd year?
No, you cannot. You can apply once either your 1st or your 2nd year. And we will get into where is probably the best time to apply. So a couple of the requirements. You need 2 statements. You need a personal statement and a research statement. You need to provide your full transcript. It can be the unofficial version of your transcript. You do not have to pay to submit your transcript for this. And a minimum of 2 letters of recommendation, 3 are recommended. So we'll go piece by piece here. So for the personal statement, what you really want to be focusing on is what you need to be addressing from your background. Maybe you have a low GPA and you want to try to explain that away somehow. Or maybe you came from an underprivileged background and you really want to talk about how that has given you a different point of view to doing the science that you want to be doing. However, there is no need to trauma bomb it. If anybody tells you that you have to make up some sad story or really lay your entire life on the line in order to get it, that is not true. You do not have to say anything that you are not comfortable speaking about. If you want to talk about a facet of your identity that's important to you, you are welcome to. If you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. The point of the personal statement is to round you out as a person. So figure out what you want the reviewers to see from you. The point here is to showcase yourself. So for instance, maybe you took a special course that wasn't required. That's where you would put this. Maybe you excelled in a certain workshop or you were doing research from the jump and as an undergrad. This is the place to talk about that in big, broad terms. If you're a storyteller, this is the place for you to tell your story, right? So this is just about trying to show why they should invest in you, not just the research. The GRFP has a 3-page limit on the personal statement. The research statement, which we will get to, has a 2-page limit. There's one whole extra page to talk about yourself than your research. That is on purpose. It's because they are investing in you as a person, as the scientist that you might become, not the research, especially when you're applying as an undergrad or a first or second year graduate student. Your research is, to the scale of the NSF, small potatoes. They're investing in what you may be later. So the research statement. You want to be able to show and articulate a thoughtful project. You want to show that you know where the gaps in the literature might be and how your research would be able to fill that gap. Specifically, you want to be talking about why that gap is important. These niches that we all work in, regardless of what scientific area you're in, can seem very small. So you need to make it clear why that niche is critically important to be known and why your work is the only one that can know it. You need to be able to speak to a broad audience. They generally try to get reviewers vaguely within your field of expertise, but it's not going to be direct. For instance, if you're applying in physics, they will do their best to get you other physicists. That doesn't mean that you're going to have someone that understands astronomy if you were talking about astronomy. Right? So you want to be speaking to a broad audience that knows the basics of what you're talking about. For instance, if you're applying in physics, you're probably not going to end up with a biologist on your review team, but you don't know for sure. So you want to be able to articulate high-level thoughts at a broad audience level. And you always want to be bringing it back to your skill set. You're bringing up a research problem. You are saying, I am going to do this. You haven't proven to them that you know how. Just because you have a 4.0 does not mean that you know how to do research, or just because you're a fantastic writer, that doesn't mean that you know what it is you're going to be doing in the lab. So constantly be bringing it back to your skill set and why you are uniquely qualified to do what you're saying you're going to do. And for a lot of people, that's very difficult because they think they're not uniquely qualified. Anybody can do this project. That's not true. There are many people that could do that project, but none of them will do it in the same way that you will, because you come with a different skill set and a different background and a different way of viewing the science. So why are you the person best suited for the job? Maybe you know how to code excellently well, so you bring up that you're going to need to make up an analysis pipeline. You can bring it back and say, and due to my expertise in Python from these courses, for instance, I am able to make this pipeline very quickly within 3 months, for instance. So you will be able to show that you know what you're talking about and that you know how to do what it is that you're talking about doing. It's less about what the science is, it really is. It's more about the fact that you know how to think through a scientific project. More that you know how to think through, for instance, risk mitigation. Where can the project go wrong and how will that inform the rest of your project? No project stops just because something went wrong, right? So how will you move from there? Does the null result tell you something that's still important? You want to be addressing those things and showing that you know, beginning to end, how a research project works. Your transcript is your transcript, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. It is what it is. Yeah.
Quick question. You're applying as a grad student, do you need to supply your full transcript of undergrad, or do you just trust the paper?
Both.
Okay.
And then you need your 2 letters of recommendation. Like I said, recommended is 3 letters. Always aim to have 3 letters. If you can only get 2, that's fine. Always looks better the more you have. You want to showcase a well-rounded applicant. At the end of the day, your application packet is your application packet. When you go ask someone for a letter, you need to be asking specifically for a good or great letter of recommendation. You would think that that is not something that needs to be said. It does. Ask them if they can write you an excellent letter of recommendation. Most of the time, they will tell you if they feel that they can't, right? You don't want somebody that isn't going to write you a glowing letter. And you want to select people that showcase the different aspects that you have brought up about yourself in your application. For instance, you want someone to speak to your research skills. You also want someone to be able to speak to, say, your academics. Maybe you're a very powerful student academically. You want someone to be able to address that. Or maybe you do a ton of extracurriculars. You want someone to be able to address that. What are the important points that you are thinking of in your application? What 4 points do you want the reviewers to get from your personal and research statement? You need to find letter writers that will emphasize those same points. The reviewers are reading hundreds of these applications, and I mean hundreds of them. more likely than not, they're skimming. So they're gonna miss something, and maybe in your review, you'll say, well, wait, if they said that I didn't talk about this, and I did, it was in this one sentence right here, they're gonna miss it. If something's important, repeat it multiple times per statement. I had one topic that I brought up in my personal statement, and then I brought it up in my research statement, and then I had two of my letter writers talk about the same point. I made sure that the reviewer was going to know about it was my research background in this case. I made sure they were going to know about it. So think to yourself, what are the points that I want to emphasize? Find letter writers that can emphasize those points for you. So that puts me into the NASA FINESST, unless somebody wants to talk about the GRFP. But there's gonna be plenty of time for questions, and I'm gonna go through resources and everything at the end. Okay, so the NASA FINESST. This is another graduate fellowship. I think you technically can apply as an undergraduate, but again, it's very difficult to receive as an undergraduate, and it has a lesser amount of time that you can win for. You can win a 3-year fellowship with this one, so really not worth applying to until you are in grad school. So this is the National Aeronautics and Science Foundation or Administration, NASA. Future investigators in NASA, Earth, and Space Science and Technology, FINESST. It is a mouthful. They have not figured out how to make it better. I don't think they're ever going to. So you can get up to 3 years of funding upon your request. GRFP, you do not request a budget. They give it to you. If you win, you get the exact same amount of money that anyone else that has won. The FINESST, you have way more control. You can ask for up to $50,000 per year. That $50,000 can be split however you want it. Maybe you want the entire $50,000 to be stipend. You'll have to prove why you don't need any for tuition or healthcare, but you can ask for the full $50K to be your stipend. Or maybe you don't need 3 years. Maybe you're 2 years out from graduating, so you're just gonna ask for 2 years of money, not 3. Or maybe, like me, I was within 7 months of graduating, so I asked for 7 months of funding. You are eligible to do that. You can use this money for travel, for not just your stipend, for your tuition, for your healthcare. You can use it for materials. You can write into your budget, I want to buy a new laptop, and here is the money I'm going to spend on it. It's not saying you're gonna get approved, but you can. And there are unlimited chances to apply while you are in grad school. You can apply starting your first year and just keep applying every single year until you get lucky. And I highly recommend doing so, even though there are only 3 years. Even if you're thinking to yourself, well, why would I apply if I know that even if I win, I'll need more money on the back end? Because the sooner you win, the better an applicant you look for future grant proposals. If they see you've already won one, you look better when you apply for the next one. And then if you win that next one, you look better when you're applying for the third one. Or you can even go to your university. They'll probably be more likely to fund you if you've already funded most of your PhD already. You become a student that they want to retain because you come with a title. Now, whether that's right or wrong, we can get into the ethics of, but it's the way that the field works. Now, people often think that the NASA FINESST has to be astronomy, it has to be astrophysics, it has to be space. It doesn't. Any sciences can apply to the NASA FINESST. Biologists apply to the NASA FINESST. The key is that it needs to be relevant to NASA. So maybe the work that you're doing is going to go into building a new type of detector technology. NASA cares about that. Maybe you want to study how low gravity can impact the body of women between 25 and 35. NASA cares about that. They're sending people to low gravity orbits all the time. So long as you can marry it back to something, anything that NASA's interested in, tech development, any scientific research. Most scientific research, NASA cares about. You can find NASA's goals online, you can find their decadal surveys, you can dig and find something that your work could inform, even if it's a flimsy connection. You can make the connection, you can apply for this. This one is a much larger application. So we're going to be going step by step again, and there's going to be multiple slides of this. So first is the science and technical management statement. That's essentially a research statement. You've got your references and acknowledgements. You have a research readiness statement, and you need to provide a mentoring plan. Additionally, you have to provide an open science and data management plan. You need to provide CVs for the FI, that is you, that is the future investigator, and the PI, You need to have an advisor listed on your application. They need their CV too. You need a current and pending statement, which is about your funding, and you need a budget and narrative. It's a big application. There are a lot of moving parts that you have to be aware of. So we'll break them down. The science and technical management is a full research proposal. It is 6 pages long. So it is much longer than the GRFP, and they expect you to have a lot more knowledge about what it is that you're doing. They're giving you more space in order for you to tell them more about the science. The GRFP is investing in you less about the science. The FINESST, they're investing in the science. They want you to contribute to NASA. So your research must be strong. And it is stronger if it's based on dissertation research. If you can point to and say, this is the work I've already done, I'm going to build on it by doing this, and this is going to be the big fat end result, that makes it stronger. It also makes it stronger because these programs are interested in funding people that they view as more likely to complete their PhD. Because they can list you as one of their positive statistics on the back, right? So the closer you are, or the more likely it is that you have a dissertation that's solid, they like to see those proposals. And it's easier for you because you've probably already written a bunch about it, or you know very much more about it. You need to include a timeline in this. It is the most critical element of the entire proposal that you include a timeline. You need to break down that this is what you're gonna do in these years, and I mean breakdown as far as saying, this is when I'm gonna be doing my data collection, this is when I'm gonna be writing the paper, and this is when I'm gonna submit the paper for publication. You need to say, I'm going to present it at these conferences. I'm going to be marketing it to the public in this way. Following that work, I'm gonna be working on this thing next. They want to see much more in depth that you know what you're talking about, and you know how to do this research project beginning to end, and that it's not just a project, it is a larger sweeping goal, and you are gonna be contributing to it, right? The references and acknowledgements have no page limits. It's now double blind. So all of your references are going to be, they must be bracketed. They cannot have the names in there in order to make sure that the proposal is double blind. So there's no page limit to how many references. And you can acknowledge anybody that helped you write it. The research readiness statement is essentially a short and personal statement. It is 1 page long compared to the 3 that you had before. And this one is much more focused on how you're ready to do the proposed work. So this is where you list, for instance, any experiences that you had in undergrad that have prepared you to do this work. What classes have you taken that have prepared you to do this work? What other research projects, even if they don't directly tie in to the research you propose, what did you learn from them that makes you eligible to do this project? You want to talk about your skill sets. You want to talk about your experiences, and you want to do it succinctly. It is not an easy goal. But I would recommend, and I'll show an example, that essentially the first half of page is whatever you did in undergrad, especially if you had a very good undergraduate experience. And then the second half of the page can be more about your graduate program. This can change based on how long you've spent in grad school versus undergrad, right? So if you're nearing the end of your grad career, you want to be spending more of that time talking about why you're research ready from your grad degree. But it's up to each person what they feel is most relevant. The mentoring plan. You do not just need to list your advisors, you can use other possible resources. So you're saying you're going to work on this specific thing. Maybe you say there is a global expert in this one part of the one project that I'm proposing to do. And I have access to them. They are going to help me. That's where you can put that in. That's where you put in how are you going to be taught or learn. Maybe you're going to say, I'm going to have weekly meetings with my advisor. That is something that would go into the mentoring plan. I'm going to go with my advisor to workshops in order to learn more. That is part of a mentoring plan. My advisor has connections to X, Y, and Z experts in the field. He is going to put me in touch with them, and they are going to be able to aid me in steps A, B, and D of my project. That goes into the mentoring plan. It is 1 page, and it needs to be specific to your proposed work, right? So you're not talking about an overarching how you're going to be mentored through life. It needs to be pretty specific to how are you going to be taught over the course of this project specifically. They want to know that not only have you thought this through, but that you have access to people that can help. NASA is all about the connections that you have. NASA is all about collaboration. So if you're saying, this is just going to be me and my advisor in a lab for the next 3 years, it's not necessarily going to help your chances. Because they want to see that you have more of a science community around you, that you have more opinions, that you have a broader view of the science that you're working on besides just you and one other person. The Open Science and Data Management Plan. This is pretty straightforward, actually. Where are you gonna store your data? Are you gonna put it on a hard drive? Tell me that. Are you gonna publish it? Where are you gonna publish it? Is it going to be an open access journal where you're gonna publish it? Or maybe you're gonna put all of your data on Google Drive and then make it accessible to the public. Maybe you're gonna put it on Zenodo. Are you using any software data products? Are you using an online spectrum generator? List that here. Are you using a code that is publicly available? List it. Are you using a code that is not publicly available? Say that and then say whether or not you're going to be able to make it publicly available. Maybe you're not in control of that. So then you say, I'm using this code, it was developed in my group. I do not have the ability to make it publicly available, but my data will be. Because it's NASA, because it's government, all products have to be made publicly available at some point in time. That's why they care about this. So you just need to say that you thought through how it's going to be made public, and publishing is making it public. Next, you have the CVs, a pretty ordinary CV. You get 2 pages and your PI gets 2 pages as well. A current and pending statement, your advisor will know what that is. That's any funding that they currently have and any applications that they have put in for future funding. You just have to list them right there. Basically, it helps them to know where you're getting your funding from currently, if you even are getting funded by your advisor, or if your advisor will have the ability to fund you at some point later in the future. It's not a huge part of your application. I put mine in with Joe Weingartner, who had 0 current or pending funds. I had only my money to work on for the GRFP. I still want it. It's not a huge big deal of your application. The budget narrative. There is available help at Mason, and at most other schools, I would bet you the exact same thing, that there is available help. If you ask the front office of whatever your department is, they should be able to get you in touch with whoever that person is for your department. At other universities, for here, it is John C. Richter. He's the one that can help you out. So you can send them a message and you let them know what you want the budget to be. You say, I want a stipend of this much. I want this much to go to travel. I want this much to go to technologies, whatever. They will write up the budget and the narrative for you. So you don't have to worry about that part. So like I said, the max allowed is $50,000 a year. For the sake of George Mason, do not include your tuition as a part of your calculations, because the FINESST is on a list of approved fellowships within George Mason, where if you win, the provost's office will cover your tuition. So you don't need to cover it. So when you're figuring out how you're gonna divvy up that $50,000, none of it needs to go to tuition, and none of it needs to go to healthcare. Because the provost's office covers your tuition, they also cover your healthcare. So for Mason specifically, some other institutions also have lists of approved fellowships, but for Mason specifically, that means you could ask for a full $50,000 to be your stipend if you wanted. Something to keep in mind, however, is that the more money you ask for, the more difficult it is to win said money, especially now in these times of tightening the belts. $150,000 is no small ask for one person, especially when you consider that other people are asking for way less. I'm not saying shortchange yourself. I am saying be mindful of what you're asking for and make sure you're asking for things that are directly necessary that won't hurt your chances. Because eventually your proposal gets read. They rank them all. The top ranked then go to someone else who is the budgetary specialist for NASA. They're the ones that divvy out the money. So just because a review panel loved your proposal, they thought it was 10 out of 10, you get your report back and it's glowing, but you didn't get any money. They didn't make that decision, somebody else did. It is someone else's job to look at the budget, look at what you asked for, and look at how much money they have and divvy it out. So keep that in mind, that when they're looking at you, sure, they know that you're top ranked, but they're only looking at the people that are top ranked. And sometimes somebody that's lower ranked than you will win over you because they asked for less money. So they can fit them in. Because if they're doling it out and they go, well, I've got $50,000 left. I can either fund this one person at 50K for a year, because that's all they asked for. Or there's two people that just asked for 25,000, so I can fund two people for the price of that one. They're gonna fund two. Or perhaps they have so little money left that it's not enough for one full person. Somebody didn't ask for a full person, they just asked for $15,000 because they needed a supplement. They're gonna get more. So. What you want to ask for is completely up to you, but just keep in mind that there is a calculation happening on the back end. The more you ask for, the more difficult it is to get. That is why it is more difficult to get a 3-year FINESST than it is to get a 1-year FINESST. It's also why many people have to apply to the FINESST for multiple years, and as the amount of years that they have left go down, their chances of winning goes up. Just keep applying. You never know what's happening on the back end, but don't be discouraged if you get a fantastic review and no money. It might just mean apply again next year when you need less. So at this point, I have a bunch of references that I can go through. So I've got my website up there. I have a page for student resources that has the FINESST, all of the information that I just said, a breakdown step-by-step of how to apply. Same for the GRFP. For both, I have my winning proposals along with the reviews that I got, so those are publicly available, and I've included what my CVs look like at the time of my application. I also have these other resources up, so there's Alex Hunter Lang. He keeps a repository of all of the successful NSF GRFP applications. People have to submit them to them, but he has them across every field, going back the last 10 years. So you can look at everything that's won, and people can even put them up if they've got an honorable mention. There's also the Michael Radke website, which has FINESST tips. He also won, and he has a complete step-by-step breakdown, very, very thorough. There's another one about the FINESST that's specific to earth sciences. So in case someone is looking for earth sciences, there's a lot of general information there too, but it is geared toward earth science if that's more your bag. And then there's the Astrobites NASA FINESST application, which also focuses more on astronomy, but has some general tips. As you'll notice, it's mostly astronomy focused. Why? Because mostly astronomers apply to FINESST because people see NASA and they just don't apply. There was one year, there is a biology subsection of the NASA FINESST. One year they got 23 applicants. 15 of them got funded. Because the money's already portioned out to them. So, just because you think you're not relevant doesn't mean that you are not relevant. Look, see how you can tie yourself back. You'd be surprised at how few people are applying for these smaller areas. Therefore, it's a lot easier to win. If you're in astrophysics, I deeply apologize. It's very, very difficult to win. Can't do anything about that. So at this point, we can either do questions or I can go through examples. It's whatever people want. Grace, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I guess I don't know if there's anyone else left online, so.
We also have Lewis in the chat.
Great, so if you have any questions, now's the time, or if people want me to start going through examples, there's plenty of time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When are the deadlines for each of these fellowships and how early do you suggest people start on the application?
Great question. So the GRFP is due about mid-October. Different fields have different due dates, but they're all in like that same mid-October week, and there's a deadline on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so you'll have to check for your specific subfields. I usually recommend getting started writing very, very early in the summer. But that's not to say that if you haven't started by now, you can't do it in time. It's just going to be a little tight, but you can. George Mason also has an office of fellowships where they will assign people to read your proposals and give you edits, and they are experts in helping people win. They've helped people win. They helped me win each of these. They helped me win my current postdoc. They've helped me win any number of others that we apply for even extracurriculars, and they've helped others win and apply for other things. So make sure to be going to that. The FINESST is due in February. There is so much time between now and then. Start writing the FINESST now. The FINESST takes a long time. It needs to go through so many rounds of edits. You want to get external eyes on it, not just your advisor who knows everything about everything that you're doing. You want to get people outside of your field to read it so they can tell you, you lost me here in the intro. You want to make sure it's still accessible to a broad audience. So GRFP, if you haven't started by now, you absolutely still can, and I recommend it. The FINESST, None of you have any excuse, you have plenty of time.
So I have like two questions. The first one is. If you are wanting to apply for while you're in grad school, but you don't have like a set advisor yet, like you're not doing research. And then. Yeah, maybe that one, I'll start with that one.
Okay, so if you don't have a set advisor yet, but you want to apply, theoretically, that means that you know vaguely the area that you want to be working in. So you can absolutely write the application on your own. Eventually, you will need to say something along the lines of whether or not you're going to be working with someone at an institution. So it's a good idea to probably go talk to that person and say, hey, this is what I'm interested in. Like, if I start working on this proposal and get it, would you be willing to take me? So definitely you'll still need to have a conversation with them before you put in the application, but you don't need them to already be your advisor. But at the time that you're applying.
And like, if you. Like, find someone who says that, who agrees to like be the PI for your proposal, like. Do you have to keep working it, like, are you like tied to that person?
Great question, no. So the GRFP, you win the money. That's your money. So you can go work with whoever you want. You don't like working with somebody, great, you can go find somebody else to work with. For instance, I did all of my graduate research at NASA. Because my money was tied to me, so I could find an external advisor and work with whoever I wanted. The FINESST is very similar, it's a little bit trickier in that it is technically tied to a person now. The FINESST is tied to one person within the department. However, you do not need to be working with that person. And if you want to stop working with that person, you can get the grant moved to somebody else. The wrinkle is that there always needs to be a point of contact that is a faculty member within the department. But that can be anybody. Mine was Joe Weingartner. He does not do anything related to what I do. So you can just find a trusted person and have them be your contact if you wanted to. But you absolutely can change who you're working with. You can change who is in control of the funding because it's all you that's in control at the end of the day.
And then, when it comes to like writing the research and the personal statements, like. Does it all have to be like my own work, or can I, like, if my advisor like gives me a few paragraphs from an old proposal, can I use that in the research? Like,
It's really recommended that you don't do that. It does need to be your original work. When you submit for the FINESST, you have to actually check off a box saying that it is all your written original work, and if they find out that that is not true, they will yank the funds, and also your school can actually lose their accreditation to be able to host other FINESST there in the future. They take it very seriously. Now, if your advisor gives you something and says, this is a great example, you can absolutely take some of the references from it. You can try to read into it. You can ask them questions. You can use it as a starting point, because a lot of the way that research works is that within your field, there's some subset of paragraphs that everyone basically says in every single paper, and they just reword it from place to place from time to time. You should still word it your own way, but if somebody hands you a proposal and says, here's a proposal, this is the research you're gonna do, write it in your own words. It's not plagiarism, but it's pretty freaking close. So I would highly recommend avoiding that and instead trying to have a conversation with that person to get to an original project, even if that's what it is that they're gonna have you work on. Making sure that you write it out in your own way with your own references. Maybe you do it and nothing happens. Maybe you do it and the entire university suffers. And that sounds like it's a really big bad thing that can happen, but it is the thing that happens. Multiple universities have lost their accreditation because somebody plagiarized, and those universities are no longer eligible to take fellows. It takes a long time to earn that back.
We don't have any questions from the chat. Do we have any other questions?
I just kind of related to the advisor question is whatever you write in your research proposal for either one, are you also tied to that? So
No. Yeah. I didn't do anything I wanted to do. They're more looking for whether or not you know how to write scientifically. The GRFP, they absolutely don't expect you to do it. Because You're applying, if you're applying as an undergrad, you're applying before you're in grad school, before you know who your advisor is gonna be, you have no clue where it is that you're gonna end up, right? So they're just more looking to see your skill set writing scientifically. For the FINESST, it's less likely that that's gonna happen, because by the time you're applying for the FINESST, usually you have some idea of what you're gonna do, you're at least in the same field now. If you apply for the FINESST after your second or third year, you probably already have an idea of what your dissertation is gonna be. So more likely than not, that's actually the thing that you're gonna do. But if you propose and say, I'm gonna do this, this, and this, and you don't finish all of it, that's fine. Nothing happens. They don't yank the money away. It's more about being able to articulate what the science is and them agreeing that that science is worth doing, that they want to see that. No, but you're absolutely not expected to do it. Even now as a postdoc, I applied and proposed to do something. I do not have to do that thing. I'm going to, because I proposed for something that I'm actually genuinely interested in. I was going to do regardless, but I don't have, and that's the freedom of it.
You mentioned that you get a review at the end of the finest, but talking about how your application did, does that include your proposed cost breakdown?
It does not, because then it wouldn't have made it to that person. The review that you get comes purely from the panel, so it's just looking at all of the scientific things that you submitted.
So follow-up question to that, is there any like public information on what proposed budgets were approved? Just to kind of see a stat breakdown.
Great question, no, unless someone provides you with their full application that they won. You don't get to know what the proposed breakdowns are. And every year it changes just because different people are asking for different things, there's different amounts of money, so it changes every single year, so there's no public information about it. I have mine publicly available, but mine is a little bit inapplicable because I was within 7 months of graduating. Your FINESST always starts in November, so when you're talking about funding, you're always talking about starting it in November. So I needed funding from November to the following May, not even a full year. So mine, and I wasn't including tuition, I wasn't including healthcare, I didn't increase my stipend, I said leave it at the same level that I was at, just split among this many months. So I think at the end, I only asked for $22,000 or $23,000. So like mine is available, but it's not very useful because I was asking for such a little amount of money that realistically my proposal could have been pretty bad and I still would have won. Just because I was asking for so little. My proposal was excellent, but my point being that I could have. Yeah, so the budget part is a little bit interesting, but that's why you have the budget person to help you with it. I have personally never heard of anyone winning, getting $50,000 of straight stipend. I have personally never heard of that. Now, I have heard of people winning and getting the equivalent stipend of 37 or 40 because the GRFP is at that, so they'll match that, and then using the other 10K for travel. I've absolutely heard of those scenarios. It's less about what you're gonna use the money for and more about how much money do they have. And they only break down what you're gonna use the money for if it starts to get like you're asking for 50,000 of straight stipend, but somebody else is asking for 50,000 to cover their tuition and their healthcare and their stipend. That's where it gets a little tricky. FINESST also do not have the ability to downscope. Other proposals, they'll kick it back to you and say you've been approved, but not for that amount of money. You have to ask for less. We'll approve you at this number instead. The FINESST doesn't do that. You either win it or you don't. Unfortunately, so they can't even kick it back to you and say, hey, we'll fund you, but not at the $50,000 stipend you asked for, we'll fund you at 30. Yeah.
Since the finest starts in November and those people who have other alternative forms of funding end that in August, how do you recommend people cover September and October?
Great question. So if you have an advisor, ask them first and foremost if they have 2 months of money. Realistically speaking, 2 months of money is something that you can find in a slush fund. In the terms of university speak, it's not very much that you're asking for, especially because your tuition would already be covered by the provost. If you're at Mason. And they'll cover your tuition from the start of the year, your healthcare will kick in at the start of the year. The provost takes care of that on the schedule. As far as your stipend goes, ask your advisor first. Maybe they have money, maybe they don't. If they don't have money, what I did was I went and asked the department. And they actually funded the cost. And then my advisor sent them the money later because he was at NASA, so it would have, I found out about the FINESST very late, like in August already, so I was 2 weeks up on my next paycheck not arriving. So the school fronted me while the money came over from my external advisor. Sometimes they will just cover that for you. You could go to the university. If you win a FINESST and all you're looking for is 2 months of money, people will be looking around trying to help you. They will dig that up from somewhere. And it's only a problem for your very first year, because after that you run November to November. So it will end on a November, and if you're still in school, you would have, you know, figured out what your funding was gonna be post-November then, so you have time, or you'll graduate. And you'll just end the contract, and any money that you didn't use goes back to NASA. So there's no straightforward answer to where you can get the money from. It kind of depends. You can be flipping over couch cushions trying to find it, but if you win a prize fellowship, the university's going to try to help. So you make that work with. Any questions online?
There's like questions online. So we have about 10 minutes left. Do I do examples?
So under student resources, we can start, are people more interested in the GRFP or FINESST than choose one? I think you're more interested in FINESST.
Good.
Oh, nice.
The people present can apply to both, so maybe GRFP doesn't.
Great. Okay. So this has everything that I just talked about broken down. Very detailed information, and recently actually, and after winning portion where it also talks to you about how to do your taxes, because no one tells you about what happens when you win a fellowship and then have to do taxes. And so I owed a lot of money my first year. Don't let that happen to you. Anyway, so here is an example of my research statement. So I did not do any of this. This is not the work that I did, and it's not the person that I worked with to do it. But my first paragraph for my research plan was focused very specifically on exoplanets and trying to motivate the work that I was going to be doing, right? So first, we talk about the search for an Earth mass analog driving force behind exoplanet science, just some boilerplate sentence so that they get the idea, what am I gonna be talking about? Exoplanets. Search for behind habitability, possibility of water and life, blah, 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 made it really artsy and sound fun. Remember that these are still people, and they've been reading hundreds of these, so the more interesting you make yours, like writing wise, the more likely you are to keep their attention. Biggest roadblocks to this goal is the precision with which we can measure radial velocities. That is not true. Or rather, if it is true, it's very, very, very thinly true. That is not the biggest roadblock that we have. But the point of a proposal is to make something sound bigger. Is it a roadblock? It is. Is it the biggest one? No. But they don't need to know that. They need to know enough to know that this is a problem. And I explained to them why it's a problem. So I said, we can measure radial velocities. I did not assume that they knew what that meant. I broke down what a radial velocity was right then and there. That was a key term for the rest of my proposal, so I introduced it early. Also, anything that you can make an acronym, make it into an acronym. You save yourself so much space. Then I immediately jumped into my previous work. I was lucky enough to have previous work when I was applying as an undergrad. So I jumped straight into it and talked about the things that I had already done that were going to inform this. So from the jump, I laid out the intro. I said, here's the problem, here's how we're gonna fix it, and here's how I've done it before. In the first 5 sentences. Hit those things early. That first half of a paragraph is where you're either going to grab them or lose them. Use your space wisely. And then at the very end, I put a nice bolded and italicized statement, I propose, and that's what I propose to do. Add interest to the way that you write. For instance, bolding, or italicizing, or lists. Make it interesting. Don't make it just one huge block of text that is so difficult to read. All of us know that. So don't make a reviewer try to read it. They won't. So for the next bit, I was going into my intellectual merit, so then I was talking more in depth about exoplanet science, and I talked about what the project was gonna do. You'll notice I almost instantaneously get to what it is I'm going to do, get there fast. Right, you have very limited amounts of space, so you want to get to the point quickly. You don't wanna vamp for too much. And I personally did it in 1, 2, 3, setting up my project. First, I will do this. Then I'm gonna do that. Third thing is I'm gonna do this with these different methods, and then I broke it down into A and B. Then what am I gonna do? It's easy to understand. As soon as somebody says or sees a numbered list, they assume that you're giving them an order of things to do. Think about the difference in your brain with how you interpret a list when there's bullet points versus when it says 1, 2, 3, 4. You immediately think of something sequentially. Use those little tricks in your writing. I didn't want to have to describe each of these steps in depth, but these are my methodological steps, 1 through 5. You immediately get the idea. And you'll see that after that, I didn't have too much time left to talk about. I talked very in depth about how I'm gonna do it to prove that I know what I'm doing. And then talked very briefly about, after the initial part, it's set to take a year. After that, I'm gonna move to this, and I think I said somewhere. While Solaris may potentially be largely mitigated with higher resolution, stellar activity presents a more extensive challenge. So I immediately tie into that would be the next thing that I do, assuming I get it. Right? Broader impacts. This is the part that people get the most confused about every time. In my research one, it doesn't need to be that good. In your personal statement, you want your broader impacts to be larger. I recognize that we live in a brave new world, so I genuinely don't know what's going on at the back end of these things anymore. When you're talking about mentorship, when you're talking about broader impacts, I don't know how that's being perceived. All I know is that they are currently still required, so you still have to write it. For the broader impacts for research, I talked about how my work was going to change the field of exoplanets. But that's not very broad, right? Like my work helps one niche component of a niche field of science. So then I talked immediately and shifted over to revolutionizing the current landscape of astrophysics, the lack of women and minorities in the field. And I talked about the broader impacts that I was interested in doing about helping physics and astronomy as a whole. And it's the same thing that I brought up in my personal statement. Again, mirroring. I've seen people do this for a bunch of things. I've seen people do this for imposter syndrome, and they won. They talked about how much they struggled, so they talked about how they were going to change that for other people. I've seen people do this for actually incarcerated people, where they said that they were going to go and educate incarcerated people. That program is currently happening, actually, because they got funded to do it. I've seen people write this about literacy. And talking about how no one is taught to science, right, and that they want to investigate how people science, right? It can be so many different things, right? People think of broader impacts as being something very specific, but it's just an impact that can broadly help the field. It can be anything. And this is where I talked about any extracurriculars that I had, and I had room for references. My personal statement was longer. Again, much more about yourself. So my first 2 paragraphs are a lot longer. This is where I bring up who I am, where I'm from, how that may have impacted me. I said the same bullshit that every single person says about looking up into the sky, because in astronomy, I guess we can't think of anything else. The words. And then you still want your bolded sentence at the very end of your intro. What are you gonna do? I will be pursuing a PhD in astrophysics, followed by postdoctoral research. And with my education and knowledge, I will pioneer a program to educate minority students in STEM, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't have to be a big statement, it just has to be a statement that puts the period, the punchline of your introduction. My intellectual merit, that's where I talked about my GPA. And I also bring up, this is the key bit. There. I was applying with a 3.42. Not super low, but lower than I wanted it to be. So I explained it, I said throughout my coursework, I was also employed full-time at a myriad of jobs, including minimum wage work, tutoring and research in order to fund my studies. This is true, I was working 5 jobs at the same time, don't recommend. Which led to a dip in grades in fall 2019. They were gonna see it on my transcript anyway, they had it, they were gonna see that I got straight C's that semester. In the following semester, I rebounded, doubled down in my study and succeeded in earning all A's. That is also true. They will also see it in my transcript. But in case somebody just looked at my GPA, looked at the number and said, ooh, what's that all about? I just explained it. If they want more information, they can go look at my transcript, but I addressed it head on. Address anything in your packet that you're not happy about, address it head on. There's a reason. You don't have to give everybody every single reason for your entire life, right? But if you struggled with mental health for a semester and it led to a dip in your grades, you can say that. Or you can just say that you struggled and therefore it dipped and you brought it back up. You don't have to get too in depth into it, but you should say something. You'll also notice it's almost like I was list form going through my CV. Over the course of both my studies and research experience, I have gained proficiency in coding in Python, MATLAB, Mathematica, and command line Linux environments. I was deadline. But you can absolutely, this is where you bring up that stuff, right? I brought up specific classes that I've taken, and this is where I brought up the scholarships that I've won. You're basically going through your CV in a list. But what I wanted to bring up specifically was my research. So the next, well, that was still the first page. So the next 2 pages entirely dedicated to my research. Because that was the thing that I wanted to focus on. I also had a joke in mind. I strode confidently into my academic advisor's office and proclaimed I wanted to do research with him. Of course, he said no, because I had no experience in theoretical physics. Make it interesting. Make it something that somebody wants to read. I know of somebody that won in computer science by comparing himself to a god, creating his own micro worlds. He won. At Mason. Again, going back to bold the things that you want them to pay attention to. If they're skimming, they'll most likely only read the bold things. So make sure that you're putting things in bold that you want them to really pay attention to. They can always go back and reread. What do you want them to catch? Broader impact. Oh, I lied. I have much longer of a broader impact than I remember doing. Okay, so this is where I actually talked about all of the things that I had been doing as a broader impacts, extracurriculars, whatever, and this is where I expounded more on what it was that I was going to do as a researcher. Less about the research and more about the things that I had done and what I cared about, right? Personal statements about you, research statement about research. Crazy. You'll also probably want the future goals section. Always a good idea to put in a future goals section. Just so that they can see that you've thought through your career and you know what you want to do. In future goals, I have seen this before, they did not win. And I guarantee you that this is the thing that sunk them. In their future goals, they said, I will either go into postdoctoral research, or I will exit the field and go private, or I will stay and teach at a community college. They're not gonna fund you if they don't know where you're going. Even if the answer is I want to leave and go private, first of all, maybe not something that you admit to the NSF. Just one person's opinion, but second, they want to see a plan. It's fine, you're not signing a contract to stick to that plan. Just show them that you have it. I know we're out of time. The FINESST is largely the same. But I will show. Oh, I haven't put my review up. I will do that, but I have put up my review for the GRFP, so I'll show that briefly. They rank you. Overall assessment of intellectual merit, overall assessment of broader impacts. You get 3 reviewers. They each do this. And they give you a ranking. Very good is the second tier. So it goes excellent, very good, good, poor,
Fair.
fail,
Fair is excellent.
fair, and then
I was
yeah,
looking that up
thank
because I
you.
saw that. I'm like, wait, what is
Is
it?
it? Yes.
How do they rank you? Yeah, anyway.
And then they tell you your strengths and they tell you your weaknesses. So this is where you can tell if they actually read your proposal or not. This person clearly did. This person also clearly did. This person did not. Which is fine. But you can always tell. And this, I mean, this is how it's broken down also for the finest. They will tell you what you did well, and then they will tell you what weaknesses there are, so you actually have something to improve upon. Again, I feel the need to tell you that sometimes you have a fantastic proposal and there's just not enough money for you, so sometimes you get a proposal back that's just glowing. And there's nothing for you to fix. And that sucks. But it means you're mostly done for next year, so yay. Yes, so I have more information on my finest, but this is like a good brief example, and then there's lots of other examples out there. Michael Radke keeps a finest winners and losers portfolio, so you can see a bunch of different examples of that. Same thing for the GRP, like I mentioned on Lang's website, and all of the links that I put up in my slides are also on my website. So there's the state repository, and then for the finest, this is the right one. Yeah, I know we're over time, so I'll end it there, but if anybody has more questions, feel free to come up.
Well, thank you, Natasha, for coming to speak for us. We will be posting these on YouTube, the recording on YouTube, and we have a raffle to do, so we're just gonna switch the screen share from you to Jesse.
There. Yes.
So we have 2 lightsabers to raffle off. They do have the Spectrum logo on them. Everybody that filled out our interest form is on the raffle, basically.
There we go.
All right.
Tim!
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I shut up for the.
Okay, and then we have the second one. You should remove him.
Yes. All right.
If I get 2, I can do a wheel.
Together.
All right. And for anyone who is not present, we will email you.
Megan!
Congrats, Megan.
Okay, so we'll get you done, Megan. And our next meeting is the first Friday of October, and that is a applying to grad school workshop. We're going to have a panel of already admitted grad students. Please come, Planetary 127, 12 to 1, and also a Zoom link will be sent out.
Thank you.
And we'll end here.